Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we go through the grades, kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. Today we're focused on kindergarten, the kindergarten experience, and the developmental stages within the birth to 7-year time frame. Now we're only going to talk about one major developmental change between birth and 7, and that is the 5-year change. Now in Waldorf education, we're very familiar with the 7-year cycles, these developmental cycles that occur every 7 years. We can really see it at around the age of 7 with the loss of teeth, and we see it again at puberty, and then we continue to see them every 7 years. But within these 7-year cycles, there are actually smaller developmental milestones that occur as well. Now, if you are a parent, then you can definitely see these milestones in your infants, your babies, and your toddlers. And there are times where you can really see this change in either awareness or development with your babies. But we're going to focus on the 5-year change because it is a very important change that occurs within this 7-year cycle. And it's at a time when a lot of kids are actually starting some kind of educational environment. They might be going to preschool or pre-K or kindergarten. So understanding this particular developmental stage is really important in understanding what is going on with your child and some of the challenges that might occur during that time. So what's happening to the 5-year-old child? The 5-year-old child is going through a developmental shift that is most noticeable when it comes to their play. And as we know, in the Waldorf pedagogy, play is very important, especially in the younger years, and then throughout both imaginative play and open-ended play. But when the children are young, prior to that 5-year developmental shift, you'll notice that children tend to play in parallel. Now, sometimes we might mistaken some cooperative play when the children are really young, but primarily they are in parallel play. So what this looks like is that you might take your children to the park and they might have some toys and all of the kids look like they're playing together in the sandbox, but really each child is playing individually with their toys. Now, conflict may arise when a child wants someone else's toy, and I have a lot of thoughts on sharing that I will save for another time because I still have unrefined and undeveloped ideas about sharing, because we're in a time where children are required to share even if they're not developmentally ready to share, and that can cause conflicts in and of itself. However, with children younger than 5, you might notice that there is a lot of parallel play. At 5, there is a shift in their play. Now the play becomes more cooperative. And when this occurs, you will see new conflicts and new challenges. Now, children are in their sanguine period of learning, and if you want to learn more about the temperaments, I have a video linked in the description box below. You can also go to my website at pepperandpine.com and see an entire blog post on the temperaments, which I absolutely love exploring the temperaments. And each person, depending on their age, their developmental stage, will be in a particular temperament phase, in addition to their own dominant and subdominant temperaments. Now, we all are all 4 temperaments, but there are times when a developmental phase is painted by a particular temperament. And while we may have a dominant and a subdominant temperament, we are seeking harmony between all 4 temperaments. Now, children are in their sanguine phase of development, which means they tend to be happy-go-lucky. They tend to be able to go from one task to another pretty easily, which is actually sometimes a benefit when children are arguing over a single toy, that they may be a little more easily distracted with a new toy. Think of like a child who's maybe 3 or 2, and they're both arguing over one toy, for instance. Because of their sanguine nature, or because of their ability to be distracted, or maybe they just find another object more interesting in the moment, you're able to sort of use that to reduce conflicts. Now, I don't know that this is always a good idea, but understanding that this is their particular phase of development where they are in their sanguine phase, it might be helpful in understanding when conflicts do arise, if they are tied to a particular person's temperament, a particular situation, or because of a developmental phase. So a child who's around the age of 5, who is now exploring this cooperative play, who is in their sanguine phase of development, may also be a choleric or a phlegmatic or a melancholic. They may also be a sanguine, which is very curious to see a sanguine in their sanguine period of development. But if you have a choleric, for instance, in that sanguine period of time, in that developmental shift where they're going from, say, independent or parallel play to cooperative play, you may have that bossy child who is telling everyone how they're going to play in this fantasy of theirs. So at around the age of 5, that change in their play is not just moving from parallel play to cooperative play, but usually the play has intense storylines and rules that the children either know or agree upon or have to discuss. And so you may have one child who is in charge of that play and saying, you're going to be the mommy, or you're going to be the daddy, or you're going to be the child, or these are the rules of this play that we're engaging in. And what ends up happening is that where the conflicts arise, they may arise when that play has extended its golden period of time, and you may now have children who are in conflict with one another because they are now disagreeing about the rules of the game, or that whole imagination has played itself out, or that bossy child has now told everyone what to do, and you're starting to encounter some conflicts because maybe some of the other children are like, well, I was always the mommy, I want to be the daddy now, or I was always a child, I want to do something different now. When these conflicts arise, it's an indication that that child is not just in that new developmental phase, but also is now experiencing new challenges that are opportunities for growth and lessons. The challenge is that these lessons can't come about when a child is in an emotional period of their play. Maybe they're upset because of something. Those kinds of lessons have to come after things have settled down. And a way that a teacher or a parent can settle down these kinds of conflicts is quite innovative and unique to that teacher or that parent. What I've seen and what I've come to learn through my Waldorf teacher training and the observation of veteran teachers or parents who have had many children and can sort of weather the storms and can understand what's going on a higher level, is that oftentimes there is a break in that conflict or that situation very quickly and redirected towards something else, so that you're not sitting in those emotions, because children don't really understand those emotions very well, especially if you try to talk them through it. They're not developmentally ready for that. Now, this is common today to talk through those emotions and to identify them. But from a developmental perspective and from the Waldorf pedagogy, that's usually discouraged. And instead, a redirection in that moment is what's favored. And very quickly, children will dissipate those pent-up emotions, or maybe that conflict that arose. Maybe the children were going to grab the same item and they were tugging at it. The teacher or the parent can intervene in that moment, break up that fight very easily and quickly by redirecting the children into something else. You're not going to fight about that. It's off you go, time to go outside and play. Now, there could be some controversy over breaking up that kind of discord or conflict without that resolution, but adults look at those kinds of conflicts different than how a child experiences them. So with that, the teacher may break up that conflict and redirect the children to play something else. And then the children may revisit that same game at some other time. Usually, because of their sanguine nature, they are coming in and out of conflicts very quickly and moving on. That is a quality of the sanguine temperament. that you're not angry for very long, you're not happy for very long, you're not anything for very long, because you are moving through your experiences and your emotions and the conflicts or the challenges quickly and moving on. So the child aged 5 is now in this little micro development that actually makes that child well suited for a social environment where cooperative play can exist. So if you're sending your child to a play-based kindergarten or a Waldorf setting or another setting that understands this development and that the pedagogy supports that kind of development, then you'll find that the environment is well suited for that kind of play and engagement. So let's move on to the environment. What will the environment look like for a kindergarten space for the 5 to 7-year-old? Or if you are sending your children to this kind of environment a little bit sooner, maybe for the 4-year-old. This environment is usually going to be filled with natural materials, warm colors. Think of like coral or like a rosy color. You're going to see classrooms or even home environments painted in those colors. This is really indicative of the kindergarten experience, where they are looking for love and warmth and comfort, and lots of play and imagination. And so the toys and the materials are going to reflect that part of their development and support it. So you're going to find toys that lend themselves well to open-ended play with rich imagination, so that students or children can create these stories, this imaginative story, with their peers, with their friends. So you might find trucks and blocks and felt and dolls and even miniaturized replicas of what you might find in a home. So you might find a refrigerator or an ironing board or a tool chest or a stove, things like that, primarily made out of wood, that the children can engage in their imaginative play with it. So you might have children pretending to play house, or children who have a doll, or at one point, there was a child who wanted to play like a fighting game, like swords. And so they had taken a stick and they were playing like pretend fighting. And while this is great in many environments in a closed space, this was inside a classroom rather than outside, it wasn't going to work very well. And these might have been like dowels, for instance, or some kind of wooden utensil that could have been used for fighting. And children will find ways to engage in this kind of play. It's just a natural part of their development. So the teacher, instead, minding that they still wanted to play this way but needed to mind the safety of the classroom, rolled up some fabric very, very tightly and tied it together so that the children could still engage in that kind of play, but it was a little bit safer within that environment. And I remember with my boys especially, finding sticks at the park was the highlight of any park visit. And we still have some till today. They had their favorites for many, many years. And so this is something else where you're just using the materials of the environment in order to create this imaginative play. So when my children were younger and we would go to the park, you would find the children, and usually they split up into boys and girls, but not always. They would have like this very engaged kind of play and being in the park was excellent because they had a lot of space to do this, where they would be playing with the found materials within the environment, and then they would have these intricate storylines to their games that oftentimes the parents had no idea what was going on, because it was so in the moment and it was changing all the time and new rules were being established in the moment. It was really beautiful to see. And this was not just when they were 5 and 6. Actually, a lot of this happened up until they were about 9 years old, a lot of this imaginative play. But for the 5-year-old in a kindergarten environment, especially if it's going to be in a school setting, you're going to find a lot of these materials that you would otherwise find in a home that they can use for their open-ended imaginative play. And you'll find that the school day is set up that a majority of the time is set aside for this kind of play. Now, other activities are going to be included in the kindergarten experience, like baking bread, for instance, which is a very classic experience that you will find in a Waldorf setting. You'll find students who are helping with their meal times, their snack times for lunchtime. They might be cutting up vegetables for a big stew. And so you're going to find those kinds of activities which reflect things that would be naturally happening within a home. So let's say that you want to create this in your home, which, to be honest, we didn't used to have to think about creating these activities for our children. It was part of their natural upbringing to be participating in the work of the parents. So if you imagine, and this is a little bit romanticized, but if you imagine life on the farm, for instance, and actually this also happened in the city, but with detrimental effects, because if you think back to, like, say, the Industrial Revolution, there were times when the entire family was going to the factory to work, including 5-year-olds. And so that's an example of where, yes, they were all going together and children were imitating the adults, but it wasn't for their benefit. And in fact, it could have been very much for their detriment in many ways, not just health and safety. So let's just take a more romanticized view of life on the farm. And yes, this is not practical for everyone. And I'm using this to depict a scenario to understand how children may have learned through imitation in an environment where both parents were actively working as part of life. And so you can imagine that there would be tasks that needed to be done daily, from tending to animals, to tending to the farm, to minding the home, to cooking, to mending, to sewing clothes, etc., that would be happening on a daily basis. And children would be observing the parents in this environment from a very young age, and often even participating in their own childlike way. And so you'll find that maybe the mother or the father might give miniaturized tools for the child. Maybe it's a very simple wooden hammer so that the child can imitate the father. And we see this time and again with young children. They'll want to do what their parents are doing, especially when they're young, especially when they're like toddlers and a little bit older. When they get even older than that, before the age of 7, they are imitating, but they actually really want to see a few more results rather than the more baby-like imitation where they're maybe just like hammering along but not really having a lot more to do with that other than to imitate the parent. So you'll find that a lot of times families will have miniaturized tools that represent the ones that they are working with so that their children can participate, because that is their learning. That work that they're doing is their play, which is their learning. It is so important for them. Now, this mimics real life examples, and this imitation is different than their cooperative play. The cooperative play with imagination is different than their imitating of the adults in their environment, and both are extremely important for their development and for their overall well-being. So within this romanticized view of a farm, a child will learn through imitation. So they'll learn how to do what the parents are doing. And yes, it is at a childlike level, so they will not have the same experience and expertise that the adults will, but they will want to participate. And in a lot of ways, they actually may be helpful, but they're still in their learning phase of development. They're not ready to be able to take on those tasks on their own. So back to the 5-year-old, the 6-year-old, and the very young 7-year-old in a kindergarten environment, what else can you expect? You can probably expect to see some artistic expressions with either watercolor painting, with wet on wet watercolor painting, or maybe some modeling and molding with clay or beeswax. And then you will see a lot of nature walks and time in nature for play and for stories. a lot of any lessons, which there aren't really any lessons in kindergarten, but there are a lot of stories, and all of those stories will likely have a fantastical element to them. And children under the age of 9, before the 9-year change, are very, they enjoy those kinds of stories quite a bit. And they don't hesitate to accept those stories, even with those fantastical elements to them. They will accept them because they have not yet developed to the point where they can clearly distinguish between reality and fantasy. Now, this is where I differ from the Waldorf pedagogy tremendously. Whereas the Waldorf pedagogy will provide stories that are untrue but fantastical in nature, and if the children ask if they are true, and it could be about fantastical creatures or a fantastical storyline, teachers won't say that it is not true. And this is where I differ intensely. Especially if it's going to be a lesson for a child in an academic setting, and this is different than, like, say, reading a book that's fantastical in nature just for entertainment. But if it's going to be part of like an academic setting, then for me it's really important that the stories that we're telling them are true. Now, then you might be like, well, what about a picture book, for instance? Yes, a picture book is going to be completely fine. Even if the animals are speaking to one another, it's a picture book. It's not part of a lesson. But if it is a lesson, and this is really predominantly for ages 7 and up, once they're actually in an academic setting, because you'll find that within the Waldorf pedagogy in grade 1 and grade 2, and parts of grade 3, stories are told that are like, say, the fairy tales or folklore or legends, and they are intended to be lessons for the children, and yet the content itself is not true. And you may argue that the fairy tales could be true, but according to my value system, they are not. And so I would choose stories that are true if I'm teaching them to children, and I would not promote the fantasy of either gnomes or fairies or things to that nature as part of my vocabulary with my children. And that is an area that I differ from the Waldorf pedagogy intensely. Something else that we would differ a lot with, that you will find not just in kindergarten, but throughout the grades, but especially in kindergarten, are all the festivals and the celebrations. And for us and our religious family, we only have a couple of celebrations and not really festivals, but celebrations that we will honor. Other than that, we're not going to participate in any of the other festivals, even if they're considered non-religious. For our family, we just won't participate in them. So some people might say, well, some of these things are just cultural, therefore we might participate in them, but they're not necessarily religious. For those ones, we're also going to skip over those as well. And so you're going to find that in kindergarten, you have a lot of festivals and celebrations and festivities in general as part of the kindergarten experience, and as well, and kindergarten is 2 years, so it's for 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds before they enter grade 1. But you're going to see an acknowledgement of the festivals throughout the grades. It is a really important part of the Waldorf pedagogy. So what you're going to see is an understanding and a celebration of the seasons and different sort of festivals that will support those different seasonal shifts. And within the seasons, you will see that either the crafts or maybe even the food or the stories reflect those different seasons. Now, while doing thematic lessons are brilliant, and I so support that, for our family, we would just avoid doing things that were part of the celebrations specifically. And when it comes to the seasons, I still really enjoy including the seasons within our homeschool, but also I could understand people even avoiding that if they want to be very strictly religious and not do seasonal activities. I could understand if people chose to do that for religious reasons. I hope this was helpful in understanding what you might expect with the kindergarten experience, with the environment, with the colors, the toys, the festivals, and especially the development of the 5-year-old within this birth to 7-year cycle. I hope that you'll check out the blog post that accompanies this video where you can find more information on the kindergarten experience, as well as dozens of videos that can help enhance the kindergarten experience. That link is in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can always find me on my website at pepperandpine.com.